Hey everybody. All right, so the current status of the build, putting the tail together. Here you can kind of see where we're at. So what I needed to do to make the horizontal stabilizer fairings, that's these fairings on either side of the fuselage, where the horizontal stabilizer and rudder go, or elevator, horizontal stabilizer and elevator go into the fuselage. There's a fairing, a rather large one. The base of it is large. The fairing itself is not that big, but it does fair all the way out to the edges of that teardrop shape. So I used cardstock and just cut that out using my French curves to establish a shape for those. And you know, it's just trial and error. You just draw something out, and for instance, something like this. You can see where I've cut this from. This was our shape, and we just cut it out to get a sense of, you know, how that would fit on there. Slotted it, you know, cut a slot so that it would fit around the horizontal stabilizer. So it's slotted at a little bit more than an 1/8 inch wide slot, 3/32 slot. And then that was fitted to the side of the fuselage surrounding the stabilizer, and you can see it there, how it's shaped. And then we just, using white glue, we just glued that to the fuselage, and then come back in with the filler, my Sherwin-Williams spackle paste. This stuff. Can you see that? Anyway, that's the product I use all over the airplane to get it smooth and to eliminate the wood grain. And it takes multiple coats, but this is the first pass. So you see, you just lay that in there with your finger, wet your finger to get it soft and malleable enough to where you can shape it a little bit, sculpting sort of. The rest of it will be done with sandpaper. You know, we'll sand along these edges, along the edges of the paper with a small sanding block and some fine sandpaper, and then we'll hollow it out in there using this sandpaper wrapped around a dowel. And it'll probably take 2 or 3 applications and passes with the sandpaper to get these fairings how I want them. The fairings for the vertical fin and rudder are less pronounced. Just all they basically did was have a small fillet that went, you know, to change that hard angle in there into a more softened one, and that's why that looks a little bit less pronounced. Okay, so this is the current state of the build. Once I get the tail fillets the way I want them, I'll be coating the airplane again with this product. This is just a sealer for balsa hardwood, like it says there. This is from Deluxe Sand and Seal, it's called. So I'll lay that all over and sand that off again, and then probably one more overall spackling. The entire wooden portion of the airplane will be spackled and then sanded again from 220 down to 400 grit, 220 to 320 to 400. And that'll be the end of the prep for paint. So this entire assembly will be prepped for the next phase, which is to primer it, surface primer it. Now this stuff is a primer paint, but it's also a surfacing primer, which means it acts like a very fine filler. And that'll take care of the rest of the wood grain and any other smallish sanding scratches or other voids that I might have left behind. So the final sanding, after that's been dried, sprayed onto and has dried, be a 400 grit overall sanding, just a hand sanding, polishing. And once that's all done, I can begin working on the firewall. We'll be adding some small pieces and parts to detail the firewall. Adding an oil cooler and solenoids and a little bit of plumbing and wiring that will connect from the firewall to the back of the engine. So that and that's why the circle is drawn on there. That circle corresponds to the diameter of our mounting plate, so that none of those detailed parts will be inside of or even butting up to, they'll all be more or less well outside of the circle. and that's so that the motor can mount without any interference from any of those parts. They won't protrude far enough to hit the back of the motor and cause it to not seat. We want that to sit in there, but we also want to have the detail parts arranged around it. And then once all the parts and pieces are in place, I'll be masking the airplane and just spraying the face of the firewall with our NATO black color. That's my preferred matte black that I use for all the models. I don't actually use black. It's just too black. And white is too white. That's why I use the racing white and the off-whites. The harder whites just look toy-like on a scale model. Now I've had that, I've discussed that or mentioned that before in other videos and other projects. That's just the way I feel about harsher colors. I always try to use, instead of trying to make a fade or since I'm not mixing my own paint, I buy custom colors that more approximate the color that I want, whatever that may be. So probably not making much sense now, but that's just my preference for the color black. Is NATO black. It's a bit different. You should try it. All right, so that'll happen. That'll be painted the airplane will be masked, so that can be painted black, and then that will be masked off, so that when I start painting the airplane, that'll remain in black. And once all of the airplane is prepped for paint and the firewall is detailed and painted, at that point I'll be building the wing. And again, it's a parasol wing. That means it doesn't sit on the fuselage or blend into the fuselage. It stands off from the fuselage with a few posts or stanchions. They're about 1 inch high, the struts that'll be on here. And I'll begin working on the strut framework before I actually paint this, but after it's primered. So that when I go to paint, I'll be painting the completed fuselage, struts and all. I'll be painting this whole thing at one step, and then the wing will be assembled, prepped for paint, and painted separately. And then the final assembly will just be to stick that wing right onto those posts, get that aligned and get that situated, and then glued on there. And then our overall dull coat, or semi-gloss rather. I use semi-gloss as an overcoat after the decaling, and then our last thing that goes on is our windscreen. And at that point the airplane will be complete. So right now we're probably at about, I don't know, 60% completion here, as you see it. Maybe a little less than 60%, just over 50% complete, because of all the finish work that still has to go, all the masking and painting. This airplane will be painted overall in the off-white color, the racing white, and when that's dry it'll be masked for the red striping. That's the surrounds that go around the periphery of the landing gear spats. So it's white here, red banding that just goes around the top, white on the inside. The struts are white, the body's overall white, the tail is white except for the leading and trailing edge, just a peripheral red stripe that goes around the outside of each of these surfaces. And then everything else is decaling for the fuselage. And then again on the wing, it's overall white, and then all the way around the edges of the wing are red. And then the rest of the decaling for the wing. So lots of detail too. There's lots of detailing yet to be done here. Lots of work, actually. Got a long way to go. Maybe 50% toward completion right now. So I'm waiting for these to dry, then I'll begin sanding, reapplying spackle and resanding until I get the shape I want out of those fillets, make them look nice and clean. And that'll take care of the tail. And then once again, overall spackle and sanding to get rid of all of the wood grain, including using the sand and seal. The final step, when everything is where I want it, is the primer, then the detailing of the firewall, and then the painting that black. Overall, everything on there will have that one coat of black, and then that'll be masked off for later. All right.